Rob Holden here with Tom Huntley. And Tom, if you could just give us a little bit of detail about which police force you were with and when you left and any of the hurdles that you had when you left. I know you left recently as well, which is good to know.
Yeah, so I joined the MOD Police in 1999 and sort of jumped around within the MOD Police geographically and functionally and kind of tried to do a bit of everything. Started out in the nuclear policing world and went through CID and fraud squad, back into operations with the operational support unit, a little bit of time as a staff officer, and ended up in Portsmouth as an inspector. And really, I guess I kind of got to the point where I'd done everything I wanted to do within that rank. My family circumstances had changed, my personal circumstances, and moving around the country wasn't really an option anymore. It was time to grow up and settle down. So I decided that was what I needed to do. But that meant I was left in a kind of difficult position because I still had at least 20 years left to serve. And I needed to decide whether I would tread water for the next 20 years and stay in the same rank and the same role and the same location. Or whether I wanted to try and do something different and use the skills that I'd gained over the last 18 years. So, I decided it was time to jump. And I think that's probably the hardest decision to make, whether to jump or not. I think, like a lot of police officers, I felt very confident that the job I was doing at the moment was as close as I would get to a job for life. So I had that security blanket, which is very hard to throw away. You're pretty confident that you can pay the mortgage at the end of every month, and that's a really good thing to have. So you need to be confident to throw that away. But no, I think when the time is right, and the time was right for me. So yeah, I went for it.
Okay, so and just in terms of the planning side of it, I know you and I, when we were both in the force at the same time, had some conversations a few years ago now. But what in terms of the planning process, how long before you actually had made that decision and then decided to? The phrase I've been using is hand the warrant card in.
I think probably I started thinking about it. Oh gosh, probably 4 years ago.
Right.
Maybe even longer than that, and just having it as an option that maybe if I didn't want to continue to go through the ranks, and then I had to think about what I did want to do. So I think probably a good 4 or 5 years ago started to think about it. Probably did nothing with that, nothing particularly proactive with those thoughts for a good few years. And then started to look at, okay, well, if I don't want to do policing anymore, what is it I like about policing that I'd want to have in my next role? What is it I don't like about policing that I'd like to get rid of and, look for something different? Go through all those sorts of questions. And that changed throughout the next 2 years, depending on what mood I was in and how things were going at work. And then ultimately, I think, started putting feelers out for jobs, made all the kind of early mistakes, not really knowing what I was doing, not very connected outside of my own bubble. So, I would say because of the roles I'd taken in the MOD Police and some of the operations I've been involved in, I was very connected within the police world, but that's a very small bubble on the grand scale of things. And, little things that I'll probably come on to later about joining LinkedIn. I knew what LinkedIn was. I'd talk about it, but I wasn't a member. And as a police officer, didn't feel I needed to be. But if you're looking at going outside of that bubble, it's definitely, worth connecting outside the wider police bubble.
Yeah, we'll cover that one for sure later on, Tom. But in terms of feelings and as you're getting closer towards the day when you do hand the warrant card, what was that like for you then?
For me personally, not as bad as I thought. I thought I would find the right role, get offered the job, and then have a panic. Start to worry whether I was doing the right thing. I was genuinely concerned that I would change my mind halfway through the process and have to go and withdraw my application. Actually, when it came to it, I think I'd reached a point that, I'd made the decision by then. And was quite confident that I was doing the right thing. And I think, it's such a simple thing, but for me, I got to the point very near the end, just before I handed in my application, where I literally wrote down the pros of staying and cons of staying. And for me personally, it had got to the point where, there were more on the leave page than there were on the stay page. Okay. And the other thing, of course, that I would say is such an obvious statement, but when you write down the pros and you write down the cons, don't just count them, because not all pros and cons are equal. You've got to really consider what's actually most important for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tom. It isn't just a case, like you say, it's not like there's 10 on one and 5 on the other, but it's almost like giving it a value. But again, that's not come up before, so it's a really good tip for everybody just to think about those lists, if that's how you do it. And also, that's how I did it as well. Put the line down the middle of the page and then have 2 lists. So it's not just about the length of the list. You're right, it's about the content. I like that one. So what advice would you give to others, Tom? Because there are many others, sadly, in some ways, but maybe good in some other ways. What advice might you give to them that are going to go through what you've been through?
I think firstly, go through that process. Make sure you're confident, because if you're not confident that you're doing the right thing, you will have those little wavers. And if you do, that's fine, because you can stay in the police for another 2 years and then revisit it. That's not an issue. But having the confidence to jump is a big thing. I remember throughout my career in the police hearing things like, well, if you go to the private sector, you're gonna have to really earn your money. Well, you earn your money in the police too. So it's not this weird world that's very different. It's the same in that respect. I think probably I would say, if I broke it down, the first thing I guess you start to look at is your CV.
Yeah.
So when you get writing that CV, be aware that nobody's advice is perfect. Is the first thing I say. Every employer looks for something different in your CV. I can tell you that I was told numerous times that your CV should never be more than a page and a half.
Yeah.
My CV that I submitted to get the job that I'm currently doing was 4.5 pages long.
Wow.
So,
okay.
So I wouldn't say that's necessarily a golden rule that it shouldn't be only a page and a half. Mm-hmm. And I've submitted for other jobs with a page and a half, CV. So tailor the CV for the job, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's good. Good tip, that one.
I was also told, if it's more than a couple of years old, it's not relevant. Well, again, I can say that on my CV, I had things that were 2 decades old that were considered relevant and brought up in my interview. So, again, think of that when you're applying for the job. The thing I think about the page and a half statement is they say nobody will sit down and read a long CV. HR departments haven't got time to do that, and I completely understand that. So I think that the way of getting around that is have an opening statement at the top of your CV. That really kind of grips their attention. If you can put a paragraph at the top that just makes them interested enough to bother to read the rest of the CV, then that's got to be a good thing. And I think as well, one of the things that came up in my interview is professional bodies. So I'm a member of the Security Institute, for example, a member of the Institute of Leadership and Management. If you've got these bodies that are relevant to the areas you're looking at going into and of particular interest to you, they are worth joining, and they will help you network as well. So I would certainly say that.
Tom, can I ask you a question on that? Did you join those professional bodies before you left the police or after you'd left, based on advice?
I joined one before, and that was based on advice, and because the opportunity came up through some academic qualifications that I was going through.
Sure.
So that really made me aware of the body, so I joined that. One I've joined since, but would still, hugely recommend doing so beforehand. These things on your CV do show that you've got a particular interest, a particular passion for the areas you're going into. Yeah,
no, that's good. So again, some new advice there that we haven't picked up before. So joining professional bodies, ideally have a do a bit of research and find out which ones are the appropriate ones, depending on what the choice is about in your next job. Great stuff there, Tom. So what have you done since leaving the police? I know we've had a conversation in the margin before this interview, but so can you just tell our audience what it is that you do now then?
Yeah, so I work for a company that essentially does travel risk management. My role is in physical security, so it's my role to risk assess and put in place appropriate mitigation for individuals from companies that are travelling to either medium or high risk areas. Okay. I don't deploy myself. My role is very much like a tactical commander would be in the police. Yeah. So it's sort of assess. If you spoke about it in policing terms, it's to assess the information and intelligence, right. Look at threat and risk, grade those risks. Then look at the tactical options, which are obviously very different in this world. Yeah. Match those tactical options against the risks to mitigate them, and then make a recommendation to the client, if you like. And essentially, the client, I guess, in policing terms, the client is the gold commander. They have the say on what they want to achieve, and the yes or no on whether the operation goes ahead. Right. But in that respect, it's quite like policing. But importantly, if I went into an interview with a civilian company, for want of a better word, and started talking about, oh, it's fine, I'm a tactical police commander, so I do this stuff every day. They don't know what a tactical police commander does. So obviously, really break it down and explain your rationale. The one thing I would say is when you do that, not just in this type of role, but I think in any type of role, it's really appreciated, because we take for granted that we use these processes, and that, I call it defendable decision making, but the fact that we have audit trails about why we made decisions, the fact that we record our decision, but then also record reams and reams of rationale for why we made it. These are really important things. And actually, you've done it for decades during your time in the police service, but when you go into these other companies, you'll find that they don't do that. Actually, when you start demonstrating that, people see the worth of it.
Well, that's good. Again, Tom, we'll talk about transferable skills later on, but that's you're showing me straight away that you've been able to use your transferable skills, but don't make assumptions, as you were mentioning, about that they know what cops do, because they don't.
No, absolutely.
So it's about, and I use the doing words, the verbs, about how you do what you do. And again, so just in terms of finding this role how did you go about finding your new role then?
Oh, well, actually, that's a really good question, because that came through the connections you make outside of the police service.
Right.
So actually, I started to find out how I could network outside of the job. I had very good connections within the police, as I said, but outside the police, not very good.
So you mentioned about your new role. So how did you get into your new role, and what you're doing then?
So, I started out looking for new jobs, and I sort of joined LinkedIn to get more connected outside of the police service.
Right.
And as a result of that, one of my colleagues had left the MDP just recently. And what I found is I wanted to go into sort of security management roles, head of security roles, but the vast majority of which are based in London.
Right.
And obviously working in London and living on the south coast wasn't ideal. It was possible, but not ideal. And I didn't really want to be commuting that far. So I sort of put out feelers on LinkedIn just to ask what was available in the local area, started to look on job websites and put in the right search criteria to find the right locations. Really struggled to do so, and then actually got a message out of the blue on LinkedIn from my old colleague just saying, just spotted this security job. I noticed it's in your area, you might be interested.
Yeah.
I had a look at the role, thought, I think I could probably match what they're looking for. Threw my hat in all honesty, with sort of, I don't want to say no more passion than that, because that's not right. I certainly wanted the role, but I wasn't overly confident that I would hear anything back, because I knew it was a very difficult job market at the moment.
Yeah.
And I was very conscious that although I'd done the role in government sector for such a long time rather than the private sector.
Yeah.
But no, actually it worked out. 2 interviews later and I was offered the job.
Wow. And were you still serving at the time, Tom, or had you left by then?
No, I was still serving.
Okay.
So no, still serving at the time that I applied. And actually it was, I literally ended up taking a week's leave that I was owed, and then starting the job the following Monday.
Fantastic. So in this new role then, Tom, and probably early days for you as well, but in terms of short, medium and long-term goals, and what do they look like for you if you've set them?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm still in my, they don't call it probation, but I'm still in my probation for the new role. So I'm sort of, you know, I haven't been there for 6 months yet. I sort of set myself a 6-month probation as well to decide whether it was the right role for me, which I think it is. I think ultimately, you know, you've got to have an understanding of what you want from the role, and you've got to have an understanding of where you want to be in those sorts of 3 years' time, 5 years' time. I'm still undecided with the new role because I'm still in that early period. And when I mean undecided, I don't mean I'm undecided in terms of whether it was a good thing. It certainly was. I mean, I'm undecided whether this is the job for life or whether this is what I call a stepping stone job. So a job that'll take me to the next job. And I think that'll change throughout your life. You know, what you want at 40 is probably different than 50, and that'll be different than 60. So, you know, it's certainly looking at that. But I think that's a big thing for me. You know, I think when most people, certainly in my era, sound old now, but in my era, when you joined the police, it was a job for life. And I think we still look at things as a job for life. And actually, if you're leaving the police, it's quite liberating not to think like that, you know, not to think, okay, well, I need to find the perfect job because it has to be my job for life. Because actually there's a massive job market out there, and you know, you can keep excited and keep interested by jumping around, just as you can in the police service, jumping around different divisions and branches.
It's interesting you mentioned the job for life thing, Tom, because that's one of the themes that's coming across with all the interviewees at the moment. I think everybody joins policing thinking it's a job for life at the very beginning, and actually things change, like you say, family circumstances change and all these other things change as well. So in terms of advice then, Tom, again, I know I've asked you this one before, but in terms of advice for the type of role that you've gone for, what advice would you give to colleagues who are perhaps thinking of moving on and doing something like you're doing now?
I would say you should be more confident than I was initially, because you have more transferable skills than you think you do. I would say learn to sell that. You know, have a good think about how you're going to write your CV, how you're going to appear in interview. Somebody said to me in my current job, which is, you know, a lot more commercial than the police service was, you sell yourself and then you sell the product. But I think that's very true in interviewing as well. You know, you are selling yourself. I found personally there were two types of interview. There are the sorts of interviews that are led by HR departments, HR professionals. They're much more like police interviews in my experience. They're much more competency based. You know, they're looking at ticking off evidence from your answers. But there are other sorts of interviews as well, which are much more with your new team, you know, with your next potential line manager. And they are much more about selling yourself, you know, into the role. So selling is a really big thing as well, because for me personally, it was the bit I was most concerned about in interview. How am I going to evidence my financial savvy? Actually, you sell all the time as a police officer. You know, you may not be selling a product, a tangible product for a financial gain, you know, but you are selling a service. You need to be very good at selling that service. And actually, let's be honest, over the last few years, you've had to be even better at selling that service because it's getting smaller. So you know, you already have those skills. Other things I would say is don't be nervous of bigging yourself up, for want of a better phrase. Because I think it's quite natural in the police or emergency services, armed services, it's quite natural to play things down. Because generally, if you say within the police service, I don't know, I am a tactical public order commander, I know what that means, you know what that means. And you get a certain amount of kudos just from saying that, because people know what you've been through to get it. If you said that in an interview for a firm that didn't have a policing background, they wouldn't understand what you mean. So you have to build on that. I would certainly say that. And, you know, if they ask you about communication skills, you know, for example, you're probably the only interviewee that can say, give an example of a time when somebody wanted to stab you, and you were able to talk them down through effective communication skills.
Yeah.
And that's probably far more interesting for people that are running a number of interviews than having another person go in and say how they managed to sell a product to somebody that didn't want it initially. So, don't be afraid to use those very policey examples.
Yeah, that's a good tip, Tom. And again, this is resonating through our interview process. It is about linking those skills that every cop has got, and even police staff members have got as well, but actually making sure that it's relevant to the situation in terms of where that interview is taking place, that job interview. There's some really, really good stuff there, Tom. Slight change of tack then, and recognise that you've got a young family there with you. What's the impact been on you and your family in terms of now changing from doing the police stuff to doing the role that you're doing now?
I would say entirely positive, really. I mean, it probably sounds like such a little thing to some people, but I have breakfast with my children now.
Yeah.
Which I never did in the police service.
Yeah.
So that's great. Because of the role I do, there's still an element of call out. But I did call out for the last few years in the police service, so that's not a drama for me personally.
Yeah.
I think I'm probably more relaxed now than I was in my last few years in the police service. So that's got to be a good thing. It's difficult at first because when you start something new, when you start anything new, you're having to run at 100 miles an hour just to walk.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the case with this new role because I didn't know everything. So you throw yourself into it. You think about work in the evenings.
Sure.
But that tends to go off as you get more used to the job. So no, I think entirely positive. The only thing is I now have to think about what tie I'm going to wear in the morning. Rather than just sticking on a black shirt again.
Yeah, that's different, isn't it? Yeah. I was going to say to you, what other challenges are there, Tom, now that you never had before? And recognising policing has got lots and lots of challenges, but have you got some new challenges that weren't there before?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me personally, I went through the armed forces and then straight into the police service, and it's true that I was incredibly institutionalised.
Yeah.
And that in a good way and a bad way. I think you have a particular sort of culture within those types of environments that don't exist outside. So you are quite, set in your ways. One thing I've learned, for example, is in the police service, quite rightly, we're encouraged to think factually and to present things factually and without emotion.
Yeah.
Actually, when you're dealing in the private sector, people want a little bit of emotion. They want a little bit of, and actually, if you present things factually, it's not necessarily seen as professional, but seen as cold. So,
right.
Don't be afraid to inject a little bit of personality into things.
Yeah. I like that, Tom. And probably a bit of humour as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I like that one. You mentioned a little bit about professional organisations, Tom, but in terms of personal development, have you had to do anything on that front in terms of study or anything like that?
Yeah, I was fortunate because I did a master's degree just before leaving, so it kind of got me in the mindset of thinking quite academically and researching and things like that. But no, that's certainly something that's needed because whereas the police service will train you if there are major changes that you need to know about.
Yeah.
If you go into a role like I'm in, for example, where you are the head of physical security, then it's up to you to research the security. Nobody's going to come to you and tell you there have been developments.
Yeah.
So you need to be quite proactive in looking for that. Right. And understanding that. And that's where those professional bodies will come in, because if there are changes like that, you'll become aware through your networking within those bodies.
Yeah.
But no, you certainly need to keep abreast of it. There is no kind of annual refresher training. It's up to you to be very proactive and motivated in making sure you stay ahead of the game. If you've come into a role like this, you've probably been brought in by the company because of your up-to-date knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
But that can disappear very quickly if you don't stay on top of it.
Of course it can. And I think we mentioned before we started recording, Tom, about Security Expo and things like that. I guess that's kind of high on your list of things to attend, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you become a member of these bodies, you'll be notified about these events. They're generally free to attend,
Right.
So it's quite useful in that respect. Yeah, it's certainly something that's worth doing, worth going to, worth connecting on. Obviously, the cost of travel and things like that down to you if you're doing it personally. Hopefully, if you're employed in such a role, your company will help you with those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But no, most definitely, you need to be very proactive in getting out there. And as I say, selling yourself. You are a product once you're out in the private sector. You are Rob Hoblin PLC. And you need to think of yourself almost as a private business.
Yeah, no, I get that, Tom. Absolutely, you're right. And it is about networking and getting your name in the right place at the right time and all that kind of stuff as well. So you touched on my next area of question from very early doors. It's social media. So what use have you made? And you specifically talked about LinkedIn, which is great to hear. But what other social media and then more about LinkedIn would be good for our audience to learn about?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid to make those connections. You as a police officer, you are probably more savvy than most people in the use of social media because you've had to be so careful with social media throughout your previous career.
Yeah.
So actually, most of what you will already have on social media will be professional, and not something that's going to cause you concern. So you're starting out at a good point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
LinkedIn is kind of described as the professional Facebook, isn't it? And keep it that way. It is a professional site, and it is an opportunity for you to project yourself appropriately. I think it's fantastic. People will reach out to you. You will be proactive with LinkedIn and the like, but other people will be proactive as well, and people will reach out to you and give you opportunities. And you've got to do the usual due diligence that you would do around any other social media when somebody that you've never heard of before starts contacting you.
Yeah.
But you will do that as a cop anyway.
Yeah.
So I think having the confidence to put the information onto LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've met numerous people through LinkedIn in my new business.
Yeah.
Just like any other social media, as soon as you link in with that one person, that'll open up other opportunities for you to link in with like people. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. It's a fantastic opportunity to spread what you're thinking about. It's a fantastic learning opportunity. But equally, the same rules apply for things like Facebook and Twitter if you're on those, as they would in the police service, in terms of being careful and professional, because when you're looking for a new job, it's not unusual now for people to look at your social media profile.
Yeah, and that's coming through as well, Tom. It's a good point you make there about just be careful about what it is that you do, particularly on Facebook, I think, more than some of the others, about some of the pictures, some of the things that you say, some of the comments that you might make, political or non-political. But some people probably no doubt have shot themselves in the foot and have to go and find the delete button. But yeah, some really good stuff there. And I do like the thing about LinkedIn. I'm with you on that, the fact that it does build your professional network up, which is great. You mentioned very early doors talking about the CV side of it. So you give some good tips on CV. But bear in mind that in the police world, as you know, we don't tend to have a CV as such. So how did you go about finding out how to get a workable CV, if that's the right phrase to use?
A trial and error. Probably not the best way, and probably not the way I would do it if I was starting again.
Okay.
I wrote down what I thought should be on a CV.
Yeah.
I then, kind of went off and thought, okay, well, that's fine. That's what a CV should look like. I remember, when I was 18 doing a CV, and it kind of changed much. It has. So I thought it was right, and then actually had to admit that it wasn't particularly good when I started looking at other examples, templates and things like that on the internet, which are out there. And then I was incredibly fortunate that my other half used to work in HR, And so was able to cast an eye over it and give me a professional opinion when I finally dropped the ego and asked for it. So that was useful. But equally, I would say if you are on LinkedIn and if you are on, in connection with people like yourself, there's no harm in asking for advice, because there are a lot of people out there that will ask you for £300 to cast an eye over your CV and guide you with it. But actually, if you're well connected and there are people like yourself that are trying to help people leave the police service, there's no harm in just asking for a few tips, and it will make all the difference and save you £300.
Oh, it's a bit. Yeah. You're right. I probably have to do a sell bit here now. We do provide a CV service on leaving the police, but nowhere near £300. I must add, not even half of £300. So
good.
Our guy that does it is an ex-police officer, and it's a niche that he found. So, but I totally agree with you. I mean, I've heard some really bad stories of people paying £500, and the 2-pager, because it's got to be 2 pages allegedly, has been almost worthless. So, I think your tip about, I mean, you're lucky your other half's in HR, which is a really good place to start. But you're right. I mean, ask around, ask colleagues that are on LinkedIn, where would you go, what advice would you give? And there's some really, really good tips from you there, Tom, as well. So that's the CV side of it covered. And were there any difficulties in terms of the use of the CV, Tom? I mean, you did some trial and error from what you're saying, but any particular difficulties that you could share with others?
I think I mentioned earlier the initial phrase, the initial paragraph, a sort of opening statement, and I think that's really important. I would say don't just have a generic CV. Have a draft CV that you tailor for the job you want to go for. I've heard a lot of people say, your CV is your CV. So just, you have it. And then I've heard people use the phrases machine gun approach and sniper approach. And, the machine gun approach is where you throw this random generic CV at every job that comes up. And the sniper approach is that you tailor this very careful CV and fire it at the one job you want. I took the second view, the sniper approach, personally. But I think that works. I think if you just fire this generic CV out at jobs, it'll be pretty obvious that you're not putting the effort in. So no, I think definitely do that. Definitely use examples in your CV. The other thing I've heard other people say is, just bullet point your CV. I am a good communicator. Doesn't mean anything to anyone, and a lot of people will tell you, well, that's all you need on your CV, because it's when you get to the interview that you explain what you mean by I'm a good communicator. You won't get that opportunity with a statement like I'm a good communicator. So you need to use examples in your CV.
Brilliant. I like that, Tom. Some really good advice, and I'll go back to my thing about it's a doing word. And that's a good example to use. Tell us a story about where you were good at communicating. That's what potential employers want to know about. Not just, like you say, I am a good communicator, which will pop up on enough. In terms of, if I was to say to you, Tom, what would you think would be the top skills and competencies that a police officer can take and move across to the outside world? And in particular, like you're in the security arena still, but even generically, what would you say would be the top skills that a police officer can take, or even a police staff member that doesn't have to be a police officer?
I would say, regardless of rank, you're a leader. As a police officer, you are a leader. And what I mean by that is, we all know, something goes wrong, you turn up at the event, you're in uniform, everybody will turn to you and say, right, what do we do now? And you take ownership of it and you take charge of it. And I think that is something that is actually really important. The police service, it teaches you to be a leader, it trains you to be a leader, it expects you to be a leader, and you will have experience of being a leader because you've had to be. And actually, that's something that I think we take for granted in the police service, because when you get out into the real world, for want of a better phrase, there are a lot of managers who are very good at managing process and very good at understanding policy. But as we all know, there is a difference between leadership and management. Leadership is much more a people process, and you will already have those skills as a police officer. So, don't necessarily think you need to start again at the bottom. That's another thing I've heard people say. Well, if you leave the police service, you're going to have to start again at the bottom. You don't necessarily. If you explain your skills properly, you can go in at a decent level into other organisations. So don't think that you need to do that. Communication skills we've touched on already, but my gosh, you are a good communicator as a police officer because you've had to be. And also, I think that kind of systematic approach is very important, and explain that to people. That you don't work intuitively. Solely intuitively, that you understand process, you understand the need to provide rationale, you understand the need to maintain records, because whatever business you go into, that's important, but you have done it for the last few decades, in the police service, if that's what you've done. And that's regardless, again, of rank. I think there's also a tendency to think, if you're leaving the police service, that, if you're kind of superintendent level, then, yes, you happen to manage a police force, but you could also manage, a branch of Tesco's or, whatever it may be. You are a manager and therefore you could manage. But if you're a cop, you drive fast cars and you break up fights. But actually, we know you do so much more than that. But as far as people who have never been in the police service and never known somebody in the police service, that's what you do. You drive fast cars and you break up fights, because that's what I saw on ITV yesterday. So, that's the role. And you need to reassure them in the interview that, yes, you do all that. And they'll like the fact that you do all that because, that's interesting. That's why they make television programs about it, write books about it. But it's not just that,
Yeah, I agree, Tom. There's some really, really, really good stuff there. Different tack now, and probably an appropriate one because of where you left in terms of your career profile. Financial advice. I mean, what advice did you get from the force? I suspect not a lot, but I've got to ask the question. What advice did you get from anywhere else, and how did you take that into context in terms of doing what you're now doing?
Financial advice, none really. If I'm honest, from the force, I think. And this is no criticism of the force, it's just an observation of the factual reality. When you hand in your notice, it's thank you very much, sorry to be leaving you, but I understand why you're doing it. And then you serve out the time you've got left and you leave. And I think that's even more prevalent now that more people are leaving the police service, and it's becoming less of a job for life and more of a job that you do for a little bit and then go and do something else, So people leave more regularly. In terms of pension and things like that, I contacted the people that provide our pension just to make sure that I understood exactly where that was going to be when I left and what was going to happen to it. And obviously, I'd recommend doing that, and I'm sure people leaving the police service would do that. You need to think about what you're going to do in terms of your pension going forward, because one of the great benefits, although it's controversially changed recently, one of the great benefits of the police service is the pension scheme. So that has to factor into your long-term planning. And I would take some advice and try to understand what that looks like, and that needs to factor into your long-term goals when you're considering leaving. If I was going to retire at 55 and I leave now, what are my options in terms of taking that pension forward? Because it's going to be a lot smaller if I don't do something quite radical about it. So it definitely needs to factor in. But I think when I talked about the list of pros and cons, finance obviously weighs heavily on that. But it sounds, without wanting to get too deep and meaningful, money's not everything.
No, I agree.
And you've got to think about what's going to make you happy and what's going to challenge you. One of the pros and cons of being in the police service, if you've been in it like I had for nearly 2 decades, and I'd been at the rank of inspector for more than 10 years. There wasn't a lot that was going to scare me about being an inspector. You know, you could throw anything at me and I'd probably been there and done it. And so I'm very confident about it. So that's a pro because, you know, I was very confident in my role. But it's also a con because it's not very exciting anymore when you've been there and done it all. And, you know, nothing's really going to challenge you that much. So, you know, don't just think financially. Think what's going to challenge me, what's going to keep me happy, what's going to keep me interested. You know.
Interesting. So I call it the reason for getting out of bed in the morning. That's what I call it. And I know exactly what you're saying. And I think that's why a lot of people do kind of think time to move on and go do something different. So some new challenge. So I get it. I get exactly where you're coming from with that one. In terms of, we talked about job interviews already, Tom, but in terms of preparation, how well prepared do you think you were for the job interviews you went for after leaving the police?
I think one thing you're very good at is giving examples. You know, we're trained throughout to give examples, whether we're going sideways into another department, you know, into CID, or we're going, you know, for promotion. You're trained to always think example, and you know, we tend to prepare like that for interviews. So I think that's a positive, most definitely. I would say that the other advice I gave earlier about being quite personal rather than just factual, that's a combination that you need to get. You need to give examples, but don't just sit there and give, you know, a factual example of what you did. Inject some personality into that as well, because people want to know about you, not just your experiences.
No, I agree with that as well. Lots of police officers, police staff, Tom, leave for different reasons. Some do the 30 years or 40 years, depending on which force they're in. Some do it because of family, domestic issues, all that kind of stuff, and leave early. But either way, however you leave, it's a daunting prospect. So what do you think is the most daunting part of actually leaving the police?
I think the most daunting part is walking away from that thing that you know so well, firstly. And, you know, there's me saying that money isn't the most important factor, and I genuinely don't think it is. But you know, there is that security blanket that I spoke about, that I know that, you know, I would have to. I'll choose my words carefully here, but let's be honest, you have to mess up quite badly to lose your job in the police.
I agree with you.
You know, and that's quite a good thing to have, because you're confident that, you know, this time next year I'll still be able to pay the mortgage, no problem at all. And that's a really confident position to be in.
It's interesting, Tom, because you've used, like, a lot of the interviewees have used the word confidence. It's having the confidence to know that you can still get the money into the mortgage or whatever it is that you need the money for. Might not be the same money, but it's the fact that that's part of your decision-making process. Might even be subconscious, but you're confident. You're confident that you can do it, which is really good to know as well. Next question, Tom, and we're coming near the end of the interview now. In terms of engagement with ex-colleagues, then, what engagement, if any, might you have with ex-colleagues?
I have quite a lot through LinkedIn, still through other social media. I still talk to my ex-colleagues at my last station. In fact, I did last night.
Right.
Just to wish them a happy Christmas. You know, family is a strong word, and I don't want to make this interview sound corny, but you know, the police is a family, and you know, you will have had some quite important shared experiences with people, and I don't think you just walk out and shut the door. And why should you? You know, there are people that you're connected with, and not everybody takes that view. It's a personal thing, I think, about whether you want to stay in contact and you know, how connected you want to be. The other thing is on the professional side as well. You know, a lot of colleagues left the police service around the same time as I did. They're now doing other things, and some are doing very similar things to that I'm doing now. So, you know, they're professionally good to stay in contact with as well. The other thing is, I would say in my world, if for those who are interested specifically going into the sort of private security sector, even in the short period that I've been there, we're seeing a change whereby I think it used to be, I call it the cap badge mentality. You know, if you belong to the right regiment in the army, and you had those connections, then you would get the job through the old boys network.
Yeah.
And, you know, if anybody questioned your rationale about why you were deciding to do certain things, it was because I'm an expert and I told you so, you know, and there was no more rationale than that, really. And I think when you speak to people within the private security industry, police officers, now that people are leaving the police service and the police service is so linked to process and rationale, you know, it's becoming a real area for ex-cops.
Yeah. I like that, Tom. Yeah, and it's good to hear it's not an old boy. It was boys and not girls, sadly, an old boy network anymore, and it is much more open and fair and transparent in terms of getting the right people for the roles. That's really good to hear. So wind back 6 months, Tom, because leaving the police wasn't here 6 months ago. So if you were looking round about the kind of April, May time when you were really kind of on your way to moving on, what kind of thing would you be looking for on a site like leaving the police then? What kind of stuff would have been helpful for you to find on a leaving the police website?
I think probably the biggest thing that I would want is some kind of mentoring, and I don't mean necessarily, you know, that regular. It wouldn't need to be regular contact, but somebody that I could talk to, almost like an Ask an Expert service. Yeah. Somebody that's been there and done it, and, you know, accepting that everybody's different and every circumstance is different, but somebody that you can just talk to and say, what was your experiences when you did this? Yeah. What are the mistakes you made so that I can learn from them? You know, what's the best piece of advice? You know, what are the two big things you would tell me? Or you would have told yourself when you were looking, you know, when you were looking to leave the police service, what two bits of advice would you give yourself in hindsight? You know, those kind of things are important. And then, you know, the networking. If you can belong to a site where other like-minded people are looking at doing similar things, then I think that's really important, because that gives you the support you need. And I don't use the word support lightly. You know, it's a scary thing, leaving the police service, and you need some support to do it, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And again, I know you and I had some contact, Tom, as well. That was prior to you leaving, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, yeah.
I knew it was something. But it's interesting because we've had the request of frequently asked questions to go up on the site, which we will do. But I do like the fact that you're talking about mentoring and having, even if it's just that one call for an hour, just talk me through what it is I need to know, and like you say, maybe 2 or 3 key points to help you on your way in terms of taking you forward. So Mark and I will certainly take note of that and make sure that we kind of publicise it more. I think we've got it, but I think we'll publicise it more on the website for the future. And as you know, you'll be a member for next year anyway, Tom, so we'll be glad to have you on board. So last couple of questions, pretty quick ones actually. So if you could visualise, Tom, what success would look like for the future, what does that look like for you now then?
I think it would look different than it would have when I started in the police service. So I think when I started out in the police service, let's be honest, I wanted adventure and fun, and, you know, I just wanted to do that sort of stuff. And now I think success is a decent work-life balance with my family. It's going back to that financial point, it's earning enough money to live, you know, in the manner in which I've become accustomed. So, you know, that is a serious point. You can't, you know, if you have a mortgage commitments, you have bill commitments, you know, your children have their own clubs and things like that. You have to consider that stuff. But no, I think ultimately I need the challenge. I need to be challenged. So that was a big part of leaving the police service, as I've touched on already. You know, when something stops being a challenge and moving sideways within the organisation is no longer viable, then you have to look at that challenge elsewhere. So as long as I'm challenged, I'll be happy. I think as long as you're supported, so that's where this sort of thing becomes so important, that you do have somebody you can turn to, because you do have that in the police service. The police service is a huge organisation, you know, and you will have your own support networks that you build up within it. And sometimes when you leave the police service, sometimes you'll go to another huge organisation, but sometimes you won't. You'll go to a small company and you haven't got that network around you, perhaps.
Yeah.
So having something like this that you can go to, and people will understand where you're coming from and understand your point of view and understand your reference points, I think are really important, because the police service isn't a lonely place because it's so big, so connected. You work with so many people. You're never lonely in the police, and I haven't experienced loneliness since leaving, I have to say, but I could understand that could happen.
It does if you work for yourself.
Yes, that's true.
Tom, this has been great. One last shout out from yourself. Anything else that you'd like to add and tell our viewers, or even explain to our viewers before we hit the non-record button?
Do you know what? I would honestly say, if you're seriously thinking about it, just jump. It's like being on a bungee jump, isn't it? And you're telling somebody, just jump, you'll love it, just jump. It'll be good, I promise. You're not going to die. If you've reached that point where you're seriously thinking about jumping, then you probably know you need to jump. So just have the confidence and do it, because you are more skillful from your career in the police service than you realise.
Yeah.
There are far more similarities in the private sector than there are differences. It's not this scary different world. So if you are not being challenged or not happy in your current role, why stay in it? Go and do something different, and and also be aware that, don't think I have to find the perfect job to jump to. Sometimes you'll have to probably jump 3 or 4 jobs until you find that perfect job, but that's okay. You can jump through your stepping stone jobs, and as long as you stay positive and have the right attitude, you'll learn something from each of those jobs that you jump through, and it'll make you better and happier at the end. But just do it.
Thanks very much, Tom.